What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show. Do you think people are born evil?
No, absolutely not. Sometimes you'll hear people say, I wish I could go back in time and kill baby Hitler. Baby Hitler was a baby. He wasn't Hitler yet. I would counter, if you want to go back in time and kill baby Hitler, why don't you go back in time and drop baby Hitler in a foster home or an orphanage somewhere? Because if he wasn't where he was at that time, he wouldn't have become Adolf Hitler. 99% of the time, you're going to find that their childhood was hard in some way. Either they were abused or they grew up in poverty, and then he went through World War I, and then his country was destroyed, and he had all this misery going on around him, and people were scapegoating the Jews, and he latched onto that and became who he was. It's the influences you have growing up that make you who you are. You aren't who you are when you're born.
You were saying you were always into the villains as a kid.
Yeah.
But what is the nature of evil itself to you?
So what I've learned is that the root of all evil to me seems to be selfishness. And to be selfish isn't evil because we're all selfish to a certain degree. You know, if you have a plate of food at a restaurant and someone comes over and says, give me half of that, and you're like, no, this is mine. So technically you're being selfish, right? But that's not bad. You want to eat your food. You bought it, you paid for it, that's mine, right? But you can look at any evil act, and you can name any evil act, and you can find that it begins with selfishness. Why does someone steal? Because they want something. Why does someone kill somebody? Well, because they hurt them. You know, you don't kill someone for no reason. You have a reason for doing that, and you're taking someone's life away because of your own selfish desire to do so. So any evil thing you look at, you'll always find that it's rooted in the self, and a corruption of selfishness is evil. That's pretty much how I see it.
Do you think people are born evil?
No, absolutely not. So sometimes you'll hear people say, I wish I could go back in time and kill baby Hitler. You know, I've heard people say that before.
Or we get them into art school.
Right, right. Exactly. See, so baby Hitler was a baby. He wasn't Hitler yet. He was just a baby. So I would counter, if you want to go back in time and kill baby Hitler, why don't you go back in time and drop baby Hitler in a foster home or an orphanage somewhere, or take him somewhere else? Because if he wasn't where he was at that time, he wouldn't have become Adolf Hitler.
He would have lived somewhere else?
I mean, he could have, sure. But the reason he became who he was, and here's another thing about most people that are like that evil and like serial killers and things, 99% of the time you're going to find that their childhood was hard in some way. Either they were abused, or they grew up in poverty, or they witnessed a lot of things go on around them. If I remember correctly, Hitler's dad was pretty abusive. His mother, I don't remember the situation with his mother, but there's some things in his life with his mother. So he had that going for him. And then he went through World War I, which that's a whole traumatic ordeal right there. And then his country was destroyed, and he had all this misery going on around him, and people were scapegoating the Jews, and he latched onto that and became who he was. Would Hitler have been exposed to those things in America? Maybe. He might have gone and fought in World War I, but maybe he would have had better parents who treated him better. Maybe he wouldn't have been around people who hated Jews, and then he wouldn't have hated Jews, or all the other people that he hated, because it wasn't just Jews, you know? It's the influences you have growing up that make you who you are. You aren't who you are when you're born. You become who you are, you know? Yeah. Another good way to look at that is like the influence your friends have on you, for example. You know, I have a younger brother. Me and him grew up in the same home, same parents. You know, obviously we're different people, so we're going to turn out differently. But you'd think, you know, if we were just in that environment, we'd grow up according to what they taught us. But I had one group of friends and he had another. And I turned out in a way that, you know, the people around me turned out, and he turned out the way that the people around him turned out, you know? So it's your influences. It's not, you're not predetermined to be who you are from when you're born. I don't think so, at least. You know, you have certain proclivities, like in your DNA and your genes or whatever, to behave a certain way or talk a certain way, and, you know, maybe you smile differently, whatever. But ultimately, it comes down to what you're exposed to. And if you're exposed to death and darkness, well, you're probably going to, not probably, but you might grow into someone that embodies those things, you know?
Yeah, this is where it gets really gray area for me
Mhm.
because I try to toe the line carefully between empathy and definition.
Sure.
Right? If you
Oh,
see
yeah.
evil, you see Hitler try to exterminate millions of people, it's evil.
Right.
He's evil,
Exactly.
period. And
Yes.
I'm sure we're definitely going to come back to him
Of course.
later and all that. But it's also important, I think, to learn from situations such that we can help avoid them in the future as best we can to understand why they got that way, which requires what? It requires empathy,
Exactly.
which you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, am I going to show any empathy to baby Hitler?
Yeah.
Well, maybe baby Hitler you can.
Right.
There's a story, though, that I think about all the time. I've told it a few times throughout the history of this podcast. So sorry for people who've already heard this. But my buddy Josh
Okay.
from college grew up in the Bronx, grew up in the projects. And he's a brilliant guy.
Okay.
And he also had both parents in the home.
Mhm.
And his mom was a teacher at one of the local schools, amazing parents. So that was an advantage that a lot of kids you grew up around didn't have. They had
Right.
one parent in the home, no money, no guidance. But he was able to work hard and get into a program that by high school, he had the opportunity to go to a public school in Connecticut in like a really good neighborhood. So he would live there 5 days a week and then come home on Friday evenings to the Bronx and go back on Sunday night or whatever. And so one time when he was a freshman, I think it was the first time he might have lived there on the weekends too, but it was the first time he was coming back from the school, whatever it was. And he gets dropped off in the Bronx and he's walking back to his house and he gets to a corner where he sees a buddy of his who he grew up with.
Okay.
14-year-old kid, just like him. And he goes, "Hey, what's up, man?" And the kid looks back at him like, "Hey," like not necessarily happy to see him, but not mad. So Josh goes over and dabs him up. And Josh immediately knew what he was doing on the corner. You know,
Right.
He was slinging drugs. And the kid, and I give a lot of respect to this, the kid looked at Josh and said, "How you doing?" He goes, "Good, it's going good." He goes, "Oh, you liking it out there?" Yeah, it's good so far." "Listen, Josh, walk over to the other side of the street. This is not the life for you. You stay where you need to go because you're representing us."
Right.
And literally, he walked across the street. They looked at each other, nodded, and went on their way. Now, that kid, because of lack of choice and environment, I don't know what became of him. He may very well have become, some drug kingpin or something.
Right.
Selling poison to people
Sure.
or they get killed, which is an inherently evil thing.
Sure.
But there was a presence of mind in him to know that he didn't want to drag everyone else there with him, and he felt like he had no choice. So how much in that situation does then the evil act, selling heroin or something, necessitate someone who has decided there's no other choice for them versus someone who is truly elitely evil?
So and remind me again in the story. So he grew up in the same environment with him, right?
Yes, same exact environment.
So I would guess that, him and Josh had different friend groups. They weren't just friends with each other and had the same exact friends. He probably fell in with some different people, or he had family members that brought him into that, right? So especially when you're exposed to environments where you feel like that's the only choice you have, that's, how do I say this? So let me clarify your question again. So you're asking what's the difference between someone who feels like they have to do something evil and someone who is like supremely evil, like a serial killer? Okay.
That's a good way of putting it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That comes down to both are influenced by their environmental influences, right?
Yes.
But one person, so a serial killer, for example, is extremely rare, and I don't even know if there's any cases. There probably is, of a serial killer who lived in a warm and loving environment and never experienced anything horrible in their youth. There's probably a few outliers, but they are the exception, not the rule.
Oh, yeah.
And so the serial killer, he developed a personality disorder, which is antisocial personality disorder, which most people commonly associate with like psychopaths or sociopaths.
Yes.
Which is, people say it's like an outdated term, but because it's so common, I still like to use it. So the difference between those two people would be that disorder. You know, he grew up in an environment where things were great, you know, Josh's friend. But then later on, he was influenced by people who maybe said, hey, this is a way to make quick money. You know, this is a way to get ahead in life. And
it's the only way.
It's the only way. You know, and those people influenced him to do that. It wasn't in him necessarily to naturally gravitate towards that because of something within him. You know, it was the people around him who said, hey, this is what you got to do. This is what you need to do. And there was no other people around him who were probably saying, no, it's not what you have to do. It's an option, you know, but, you know, if you want to do that, great, or don't do that, but you could go to school or whatever, you know. For a serial killer or someone who's supremely evil, it's typically like they can control it in a way because there are psychopaths and sociopaths all around us. You know, it's not every psychopath and sociopath is going to become a serial killer or a Hitler, you know.
Let's hope not.
Right, exactly.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.